I found the first envelope by accident, tucked behind the washing machine like it had slipped there to hide from me. At the time, I didn't know that thin, dusty envelope would end my marriage, not with a scream or a slap, but with a quiet kind of heartbreak that settles deep in your chest and refuses to move. The washing machine was rattling again that morning, banging against the wall like it had a complaint of its own. I remember sighing, rolling up the sleeves of my old gray sweater, and muttering about how everything in this house seemed to be falling apart at the same time. The floor was cold under my bare feet. The smell of leftover coffee hung in the air, burnt and bitter. I pulled the machine forward just enough to check the hose, and that's when I saw it, an envelope, yellowed at the edges, thick with papers inside. At first, I thought it was junk mail that had slipped back there years ago. Old warranties. Forgotten bills. The kind of things that pile up when you're too tired to care. I wish I had left it there. Before all of this, I truly believed we were broke. Not tight this month, broke. Not let's wait until next paycheck, broke. I mean the kind of broke where you count change at the grocery store, where you turn the heat down, and wear sweaters indoors, where you pretend not to notice when your shoes start splitting at the soles. My husband, Daniel, and I had been married for 23 years. We weren't flashy people. No luxury cars, no vacations to tropical beaches. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house that always needed something fixed, leaky faucets, peeling paint, a roof that groaned when it rained hard. Daniel worked in logistics for a mid-sized company. I worked part-time at a local elementary school, helping kids who struggled with reading. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered to me. Children have a way of looking at you like you're important, even when you feel invisible everywhere else. We had learned how to live small. I learned how to stretch a pot of soup for 3 days. How to buy meat only when it was marked down. How to smile and say, "We're fine," when friends talked about renovations or new cars. Daniel used to say it would get better. Once the debts are gone, he'd say, rubbing his temples at the kitchen table. Once things settle down. So I waited. I sacrificed. I believed. Our daily life had a rhythm to it, quiet and predictable. Daniel woke up early, always before the sun. I'd hear the soft clink of his mug against the counter, the low hum of the coffee maker. Sometimes he'd kiss my forehead before leaving, his lips warm, smelling faintly of aftershave and caffeine. Other mornings, he'd be distracted, already halfway into the day before it began. On those days, he'd barely look at me. I told myself that was stress. In the evenings, we sat across from each other at the same small kitchen table we'd had since our first apartment. The surface was scratched and stained, but it felt familiar, like an old friend. "How was work?" I'd ask. "Fine," he'd say, every time. One word. Flat. Final. I learned not to push. Money was always the shadow in the room. We talked around it, never through it. Daniel handled the finances, or at least, that's what he told me. It wasn't that I didn't want to be involved. It was that every time I asked, he made it sound complicated, overwhelming. "I've got it," he'd say. "You don't need to worry." So I didn't. Or I tried not to. Looking back, there were signs. Small ones. The kind you only recognize after everything falls apart. Daniel was secretive with his phone. Not in an obvious way, no sudden password changes or frantic hiding, but there was a tension in him whenever it buzzed. A stiffness in his shoulders. A pause before he checked it. He also started insisting that certain mail was work-related and needed to be sorted by him. Bills, statements, envelopes with official-looking logos. "Just toss it on my desk," he'd say if I picked something up. "I'll handle it later." I remember once joking, "You act like you're hiding gold bars in there." He laughed, but it was the wrong kind of laugh. Too quick. Too sharp. Still, I trusted him. When you've built a life with someone for over 2 decades, trust isn't something you question easily. It's woven into everything, your routines, your plans, your sense of safety. And I was tired. Tired people don't ask hard questions. That morning with the washing machine felt ordinary. That's what still gets me. The house was quiet except for the ticking clock in the hallway. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked lazily, like it had nowhere better to be. I reached for the envelope, my fingers brushing dust and lint. It was heavier than I expected. Inside were bank statements. Not ours, or at least, not the account I knew about. My name was on them. My full legal name, typed neatly at the top. The numbers didn't make sense at first. Too many zeros. Balances that didn't belong to the life I was living. I remember sitting down on the cold tile floor, my back against the washing machine, the papers trembling in my hands. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Daniel was good with numbers. Maybe this was some old account. Maybe it was empty now. Maybe I was misunderstanding what I was seeing. I needed that to be true. Because if it wasn't, then everything I believed about my marriage, my sacrifices, my life, it was all built on a lie. I folded the papers carefully, slid them back into the envelope, and placed it on the kitchen counter like it might bite me if I held it too long. The coffee had gone cold. The clock kept ticking. And somewhere deep inside me, a quiet voice whispered that this was only the beginning. I didn't confront Daniel right away. That's something people always ask when I tell this story later, why I didn't storm into his office, wave the papers in his face, demand answers. But shock doesn't look like shouting. Sometimes it looks like silence. Like moving through your day as if nothing has changed, even when everything has. I spent that morning going through the motions. I fixed the washing machine hose, pushed it back into place, wiped the dust off my hands. I washed the mug Daniel had left in the sink, though my fingers slipped on the ceramic because they wouldn't stop shaking. At work, I sat with a little boy named Marcus, sounding out words from a book about a dog who learns to trust again. My voice sounded normal to my own ears, but inside my head there was a constant hum, like a warning alarm that wouldn't shut off. Every few minutes, I thought about those numbers. The balance. My name printed there so casually, like it belonged. When I got home that afternoon, the envelope was still on the counter where I'd left it. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up again. This time, I read everything slowly. There were 3 statements in total. 3 different banks. All addressed to me. All opened at different times over the past 7 years. 7. I felt sick. The earliest account showed modest amounts at first, small deposits here and there. Then, over time, the numbers grew. Transfers. Interest. Large sums that never touched the checking account I used to buy groceries and pay utilities. There was also something else folded between the papers. A copy of a property deed. I remember my breath catching when I saw it. A sharp, painful inhale that felt like it scraped my lungs on the way in. The property was listed under my name. Not Daniel's. Mine. A small rental property 2 towns over. Purchased 5 years ago. Paid in full. I had never seen it. Never signed anything. Never been told. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd counted pennies, where I'd apologized for needing new shoes, where I'd agreed we couldn't afford a short weekend away for our anniversary. My hands went numb. That evening, Daniel came home later than usual. I heard his key in the lock and felt my heart start to pound so hard it made my ears ring. I felt like I was watching myself from a distance as I stood up, smoothed my sweater, and put the envelope back where I'd found it, behind the washing machine. I wasn't ready yet. He walked in, loosening his tie, his face already tired. "Long day," he said. I nodded. "Dinner's in the oven." We ate in near silence. The clink of forks against plates sounded louder than usual. I watched his hands as he ate, steady, confident. The same hands that had held mine during funerals and weddings, during sickness and joy. After dinner, he went to shower. I listened to the water run, steady and oblivious. That was when I did something I'd never done before. I went into his home office. Daniel had always been particular about that room. It was small, just a desk, a filing cabinet, and shelves full of binders labeled with dates and acronyms I didn't recognize. I had always respected that space, knocking before entering, asking permission. This time, I didn't knock. The room smelled faintly of dust and old paper. I opened the filing cabinet slowly, half expecting him to appear behind me, angry and accusing. He didn't. Inside were folders, neatly organized, alphabetized. Under F I found more bank statements. Under P, more property documents. Under my name, again and again, some of the properties were small. Rental units. One was land, undeveloped but valuable. All purchased quietly. All over the past decade. I sank into the desk chair, my legs barely holding me. This wasn't carelessness. This was a system. I stayed up late that night, pretending to watch television while Daniel scrolled on his phone beside me. My mind was racing, connecting dots I hadn't even known existed. How many times had he told me we couldn't afford something because money was tight? How many holidays had we skipped? How many arguments had ended with me apologizing for asking? I remembered the year my mother got sick, and I offered to help pay for her home care. We can't, Daniel had said firmly. We're barely staying afloat. So I took on extra shifts. I burned myself out. I let guilt eat at me. All while money sat quietly in accounts with my name on them. When Daniel finally went to bed, I stayed up and opened my laptop. I searched the addresses on the deeds. They were real. Occupied. Rented. Generating income. Income one had never seen. I closed the laptop and stared into the dark living room, lit only by the glow of the streetlight outside. The house creaked softly, settling, like it always did at night. I felt like a guest in my own life. The next morning, I called the bank listed on one of the statements. My voice shook as I gave my name, my date of birth. The woman on the other end was polite, professional. Yes, ma'am, she said after a pause. I see the account. How much is in it? I asked, she told me. I had to sit down. It was more money than I'd ever had access to in my entire life. Enough to pay off our mortgage twice. Enough to fix everything Daniel had said we couldn't afford. And how long has this account been active? I asked. Since 2016. I thanked her and hung up. I didn't cry. Not yet, something else was forming in me, something colder, steadier. A need to understand not just what Daniel had done, but why. That evening, I finally asked. Daniel, I said casually as we folded laundry together. Do you own any property? He didn't look up. Why? Just curious. There was a pause. Too long. No, he said. Why would I? I folded a towel carefully, my hands moving on instinct. I was thinking about investing, I said. For the future. He laughed softly. With what money? I looked at him then. Really looked at him. And in that moment I knew. He thought I would never find out. I went to bed that night with my back to him, staring at the wall. His breathing slowed beside me, even and peaceful. Mine didn't. I wasn't sure what I was going to do yet. I only knew one thing for certain. Daniel had built a secret life on my name, my silence, my sacrifice. And secrets like that never stay buried forever. The next few days passed in a strange, suspended state, like the air before a storm. Daniel went on with his routines, unaware, or pretending to be unaware, that something had shifted. He kissed my cheek in the mornings. Asked what I wanted for dinner. Complained about traffic and deadlines. And I played my part. I nodded. I smiled when expected. I answered him the way I always had. But inside, I was cataloging everything. Every word he chose. Every glance that lingered too long. Every moment he avoided my eyes when money came up, which suddenly felt like all the time. At night, after he fell asleep, I lay awake listening to the rhythm of his breathing, thinking about how carefully this had all been constructed. Not just the accounts and properties, but the story he'd fed me for years, the narrative of struggle, of sacrifice, of patience. He had turned my loyalty into his greatest asset. I decided I needed help. Not emotional help, not yet, but practical help. On my lunch break one afternoon, I drove to a small law office tucked between a dry cleaner and a bakery that always smelled like warm bread. I sat in my car for a full 5 minutes before going in, my hands gripping the steering wheel. The lawyer was a woman around my age, with silver threading through her dark hair and kind but sharp eyes. Her office was modest, with framed degrees on the wall, and a plant that looked like it had survived many long conversations. I told her everything. I laid the bank statements and copies of the deeds on her desk, my hands finally steady as I spoke. Saying it out loud made it real, in a way reading numbers never could. She listened without interrupting, her expression neutral but attentive. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and sighed. "You didn't consent to any of this?" she asked. "No," I said. "I didn't even know." She nodded slowly. "That's important." Important. The word settled over me like a thin blanket, comforting, but not enough to erase the chill. She explained things carefully. About marital assets. About fraud. About how using my name without my knowledge wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. "He may have thought he was protecting something," she said gently. "Or protecting himself." "From me?" I asked. She didn't answer that. Instead, she said, "You have options." Options. Another word I hadn't heard in a long time. I didn't tell Daniel about the lawyer. I didn't tell anyone. Instead, I started paying closer attention. I noticed how he stiffened when I mentioned anything related to finances. How he changed the subject quickly, like a magician redirecting the audience's gaze. One evening, I asked him if he'd ever thought about refinancing the house. "We don't qualify," he said immediately. "Why not?" He shrugged. "Credit issues. It's complicated." I nodded. "Of course." Later that night, I checked my credit report. It was spotless. Better than his. I laughed then, a short, humorless sound that startled me. The irony was almost elegant. He had hidden wealth behind the image of scarcity, and in doing so, had built it all on me. My name. My credit. My quiet compliance. The first real confrontation happened over something small. We were at the grocery store, standing in the cereal aisle. Daniel reached for the cheapest brand, like he always did. "I'm going to try this one," I said, picking up a slightly more expensive box. "Not luxury. Just normal." He frowned. "That's unnecessary. It's $2 more. We need to be careful." I turned to face him fully. Careful of what? People moved around us, carts squeaking, a child whining somewhere nearby. Daniel's jaw tightened. "You know what I mean," he said. "We don't have room for extras." Something in me snapped, not loudly, not dramatically, but cleanly, like a thread pulled too tight. "We've never had room," I said quietly. "Not once." "Isn't that strange?" He stared at me, suspicion flickering across his face. "What's going on with you lately?" he asked. "Nothing," I said, and for the first time, it wasn't entirely a lie. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I wrote everything down. Dates. Amounts. Conversations I remembered clearly. The times he'd refused to help my family. The repairs we'd delayed. The moments I'd felt small for asking. I realized something as I wrote. This wasn't just about money. It was about control. Daniel had decided, somewhere along the way, that I didn't deserve to know the truth. That I couldn't be trusted with it. That my role was to endure, not to choose. And that realization hurt more than the deception itself. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. Daniel made a mistake. One afternoon, he left his laptop open on the dining table. A banking website was pulled up. Not one I recognized, but I recognized the balance. My balance. I stood there for a long time, staring at the screen, feeling strangely calm. Like my body had already processed the worst of it, and was ready to move on, when Daniel came home, and saw me sitting there, the color drained from his face. "How long?" he asked quietly. I closed the laptop. "How long what? How long have you known?" I took a deep breath. "Long enough." He sat down across from me, rubbing his hands together. He looked smaller then. Older. "I was going to tell you," he said. "When?" I asked. He didn't answer. "I was trying to protect us," he said instead. "You worry too much. I didn't want you stressed." I laughed softly. "So you let me believe we were drowning. It was safer this way." "For who?" I asked. He looked at the floor. That was his answer. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. Not then. I told him I had spoken to a lawyer. That got his attention. His head snapped up. "You what?" "I needed to understand what you'd done," I said. "And what it means." The silence between us was thick, heavy with everything unsaid. "You used my name," I continued. "You made decisions for me without me. You let me live small so you could live secure." "I did it for us," he said again, weaker this time. "No," I said gently. "You did it without me." He opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time in our marriage, Daniel had nothing left to explain. I went to bed alone that night. He slept on the couch, though I hadn't asked him to. As I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, I felt something unexpected. Relief. The truth was finally out in the open, where it could no longer rot quietly between us. What came next would be painful. Complicated. Public. But it would be honest. And that, I was learning, was worth more than all the hidden money in the world. The days after the confrontation felt heavier than the ones before it. There was no shouting, no dramatic packing of bags. Just a quiet, suffocating tension that settled into every corner of the house. Daniel moved through the rooms like a guest who'd overstayed his welcome. He spoke carefully, as if every word needed permission. I noticed how often he watched me, like he was trying to measure how much damage had already been done. I didn't rush anything. The lawyer had told me something important before I left her office the second time. "Take your time," she'd said. "Truth has a way of rushing people. You don't need to." So I didn't. Instead, I gathered. I requested copies of every account in my name. I asked questions at banks, signed forms, listened carefully while clerks explained balances and histories. Each confirmation felt like another brick added to a wall I hadn't known I was building. Daniel watched from a distance, helpless. One evening, he finally asked, "Are you leaving me?" I set down the folder I was holding and looked at him. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I'm still finding out who I'm married to." That answer hurt him more than anger ever could. As the picture became clearer, something else emerged. Some of the money Daniel had hidden wasn't just savings, it was income he hadn't declared. Rent from properties that never appeared on our joint tax returns. Accounts that had grown quietly while we scraped by. The lawyer's voice echoed in my head. "This isn't just marital deception." I confronted Daniel again, this time with specifics. "You didn't just hide money," I said. "You hid responsibility. He sank into a chair, his shoulders slumping. I was scared, he said. Once I started, I didn't know how to stop. I studied him then, the man I had loved, the man who had chosen secrecy over partnership. Fear doesn't excuse betrayal, I said. It explains it. That's all. The first public consequence came from a place I hadn't expected. Taxes. Letters arrived, official, unmistakable. Daniel's name. My name. Our address. He opened one at the kitchen table and went pale. They know, he whispered. Yes, I said. They do. I didn't feel triumph. Just a quiet, steady sense of inevitability. What's buried eventually pushes its way to the surface. Daniel hired an accountant, then another lawyer. The house filled with hushed phone calls and paperwork. I stayed present but detached, watching a storm unfold that I had not created, only uncovered. When family began to notice the strain, questions followed. Daniel's sister called me one afternoon, her voice sharp with concern. Is everything okay? She asked. I paused. Define okay. She sighed. He says you're upset about some accounts. Some, I repeated softly. I didn't explain further. I didn't need to. Truth has a way of spreading without effort. The hardest conversation was with my children. They were grown, living their own lives, but still tied to us in ways that mattered. I invited them over for dinner, my hands trembling as I chopped vegetables. When we sat down, Daniel looked at me, silently asking if I wanted him there. Yes, I said. You should hear this too. I told them calmly. Carefully. I didn't insult their father. I didn't soften the facts either. Their faces changed as I spoke, confusion, disbelief, anger, sadness. Why would you do that? My daughter asked him. Daniel didn't answer right away. I thought I was protecting the family, he said finally. My son shook his head. For Mom? Silence, that was the moment something shifted. Not just in our marriage, but in how others saw him. He wasn't the steady provider anymore. He was a man who had chosen control over trust. The consequences unfolded slowly. Daniel had to sell one of the properties to cover penalties. Another went into a payment plan. His reputation at work suffered when legal issues surfaced, nothing dramatic, just a quiet distancing. Opportunities passed him by. I watched him shrink under the weight of his own choices. And through it all, I remained composed. Not because I was unhurt, but because anger no longer served me. The lawyer asked me again what I wanted. I want my name back, I said. She nodded. I moved into the guest room, then into a small apartment a few weeks later. One of the properties in my name, the smallest one, became my temporary home. It was modest, but it was mine in a way nothing ever had been before. The first night there, I sat on the floor with a blanket and a cup of tea, listening to unfamiliar pipes creak. The place smelled faintly of fresh paint and old wood. I wasn't rich. But I wasn't trapped. Daniel called. Texted. Apologized. I never meant to hurt you, he said. I know, I replied. But you did. There was no cruelty in my voice. Just truth. As weeks turned into months, the dust began to settle. The legal matters moved forward. Slowly. Methodically. And I began to feel something unexpected. Pride. Not in what I'd endured, but in what I'd faced. I had uncovered the truth without losing myself to bitterness. I had chosen dignity over destruction. One afternoon, while unpacking a box of old photos, I found a picture of Daniel and me from our early years. We looked so young. So hopeful. I didn't tear it up. I placed it back in the box and closed the lid. Some things can be acknowledged without being carried forward. This wasn't revenge. This was balance. Daniel had hidden money everywhere, but not well enough. Because no matter how carefully you bury the truth, it always leaves a trail. And if you follow it long enough, it leads you back to yourself. Living alone took some getting used to. The apartment was quiet in a way that felt unfamiliar at first, not the tense quiet of a house full of unspoken words, but a softer one. The kind that hums gently, like a held breath finally released. I learned the sounds of the place quickly. The way the radiator clicked before warming up. The neighbor upstairs who walked heavily, always at the same time each morning. The faint whistle of wind through a window that didn't quite seal all the way. For the first time in years, I arranged things exactly how I wanted them. I placed my books where I could reach them. I bought flowers without asking if we could afford them. I cooked meals that made only enough for me, and there were no leftovers filled with guilt. But healing isn't a straight line. Some nights I lay awake replaying moments from my marriage, things I'd ignored, dismissed, explained away. I wondered who I might have been if I'd trusted myself sooner. I didn't let those thoughts linger too long. The lawyer reminded me that clarity comes when it's ready, not when it's forced. Daniel and I met once more, a few months later, to finalize the separation agreement. We sat across from each other in a neutral office, fluorescent lights humming overhead. He looked tired. Older. His confidence had eroded, replaced by something like humility. "I never thought you'd leave," he said quietly, not accusing, just sad. "I never thought I'd have to," I replied. He nodded, eyes glossy. "I really did think I was doing the right thing." "I believe you," I said. And I meant it. But good intentions don't erase harm. When we stood to leave, he hesitated, then said, "I'm sorry." I looked at him for a long moment. "I know," I said. "I just can't live inside your fear anymore." That was the last meaningful conversation we had. The public part of it all eventually faded. Friends adjusted. Family stopped asking questions. Life has a way of smoothing even the sharpest edges with time. What surprised me most was how differently people treated me afterward. Not with pity, but with a kind of quiet respect. As if they sensed something in me that hadn't been there before. I began working more hours at the school. The kids noticed the change before anyone else. "You smile more," Marcus told me one afternoon, swinging his legs under the table. I smiled then, genuinely. "I feel lighter." And I did. One evening, while organizing paperwork, I came across the final statement for one of the closed accounts. The balance was gone, redistributed, resolved. I didn't feel loss. Money, I realized, is only powerful when it's used to control or conceal. When it's brought into the light, it becomes just another tool. What mattered was that my life now belonged to me again. I took a deep breath and shredded the paper. Months later, I ran into Daniel at the grocery store. The same cereal aisle. We stood there awkwardly, two people who knew each other too well, and not at all anymore. "How are you?" he asked. "I'm good," I said. And it was true. He nodded. "I'm learning." "That's something," I said gently. We exchanged a polite goodbye and went our separate ways. As I walked away, I realized I wasn't carrying anger. Or regret. Just understanding. On the drive home, I thought about the woman I had been when this all began. The one who counted coins and blamed herself for wanting more. I wished I could tell her something. I wished I could say, "You're not asking for too much. You're asking the wrong person." That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the lights flicker on across the street. The world felt wide again, full of quiet possibilities. I wasn't wealthy in the way people imagine wealth. But I was rich in something better. Truth. Choice. Peace. And those things, once found, are impossible to hide. There's a moment that comes after the noise dies down. After the paperwork is signed. After the questions stop coming. After the story becomes something people say used to happen to you. It's the moment when you're alone with yourself again. That's the part nobody really talks about. For me, it came one quiet Sunday morning. The apartment was still, sunlight stretching across the floor like it was testing the space. I was sitting at the small table by the window, hands wrapped around a mug that had long since gone cold, when it finally hit me. I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. Not waiting for permission. Not waiting for honesty. Not waiting for someone else to decide what my life was worth. For years, I had lived as if scarcity was my natural state. As if wanting security, transparency, or even comfort meant I was greedy or ungrateful. I had learned to make myself smaller so the marriage could feel stable. I mistook endurance for love. And I know I'm not alone in that. So many of us, especially women, are taught that loyalty means silence. That strength means carrying weight without complaint. That asking questions is the same as causing problems. We are praised for how much we can tolerate. But no one ever tells you how dangerous that can become. Looking back, the money was only the surface betrayal. Yes, it hurt to realize we weren't broke. Yes, it hurt to know my name had been used without my consent. Yes, it hurt to see how easily I had been misled. But the deeper wound was this. He had decided I didn't deserve the truth. That my role was to trust blindly, not to understand. To sacrifice endlessly, not to choose, and when you live like that long enough, you start to forget that you're allowed to have agency at all. I think that's why the discovery didn't break me the way people expected it to. Because somewhere deep inside, a part of me had been waiting for proof. Proof that the constant tightness in my chest wasn't imagination. Proof that the exhaustion wasn't just life. Proof that my instincts had been trying to speak for years. The truth didn't destroy me. It clarified me. I want to say something gently, especially to those of you listening who might see pieces of yourselves in my story. If you are always the one adjusting. If you are always the one understanding. If you are always the one told not to worry, not to ask, not to look too closely. Please hear this. Love that requires your blindness is not protection. Security that depends on your silence is not safety. And sacrifice that is never acknowledged becomes self-erasure. I'm not saying every secret is a betrayal. I'm not saying every marriage hides deception. But I am saying this. You have the right to understand the life you're living. For a long time after everything came out, I wrestled with guilt. Not because I'd done something wrong, but because I'd disrupted the balance. Because I'd changed the story. Because I'd stopped playing the role that kept everyone comfortable. There were moments I asked myself, should I have just let it go? And then I remembered the years. The years of saying no to myself. The years of explaining away red flags. The years of apologizing for needs that were basic and human. And I understood something important. Peace built on denial is fragile. It cracks the moment the truth breathes. The peace I have now, this quiet, steady sense of being anchored in myself, came at a cost. But it's real. And real peace doesn't require you to disappear. I also want to talk about forgiveness. Because people asked about that too. Have you forgiven him? Do you hate him? Are you bitter? The truth is, forgiveness isn't a single decision. It's a process. I don't wake up angry. I don't replay arguments in my head anymore. I don't wish harm on the men who hurt me. But forgiveness did not mean reconciliation. And that's an important distinction. You can release resentment without reopening the door. You can understand someone's fear without living inside it. You can acknowledge the good that existed without pretending the harm didn't. Forgiveness, for me, meant choosing not to let the betrayal define the rest of my life. It did not mean pretending it didn't matter. There's a lesson here I carry with me now, and I want to leave it with you. Transparency is not a luxury in a relationship. It is not something you earn by being good enough. It is not a reward for loyalty. It is a baseline. And when someone denies you that baseline, they are not protecting you, they are protecting themselves. I learned that dignity doesn't come from being chosen. It comes from choosing yourself when the truth demands it. And sometimes, choosing yourself looks quiet. It looks like paperwork instead of shouting. It looks like boundaries instead of revenge. It looks like walking away with your head held steady, not high. If you're listening to this and wondering what you would have done in my place, I'll tell you something honest. I didn't know what I would do either, until I was there. Courage didn't arrive as confidence. It arrived as clarity, and clarity comes when you finally stop arguing with what you already know. So if something in your life feels hidden, if your questions are always met with dismissal, if your intuition keeps tapping you on the shoulder at night, please don't ignore it. You don't have to accuse. You don't have to explode. You don't even have to act immediately. But you do owe yourself the truth. Today, my life is smaller in some ways. Fewer shared holidays. Fewer familiar routines. Fewer assumptions about forever. But it's bigger where it matters. I wake up without knots in my stomach. I make decisions without asking permission. I trust myself again. And that trust, once rebuilt, is priceless. Money can be hidden. Truth cannot. It always finds a way to surface. And when it does, I hope you choose yourself with the same quiet strength you've used for everyone else all these years. Now I want to ask you something. If you discovered that the life you were enduring was built on a lie, would you stay silent to keep the peace? Or would you risk everything to reclaim your dignity? I'd really like to hear your thoughts. And if this story spoke to you, if it reminded you that your voice matters, please consider subscribing, sharing, or leaving a comment below. Your stories, your experiences, your reflections, they matter more than you know. Until next time, take care of yourself. And don't make yourself small for anyone who benefits from your silence.